And now let's take a look at the situation in Harlem during the 1960s. Landlords did not maintain their buildings after this huge influx of people. They were, of course, mostly white landlords dealing with black tenants. Uh, while that while racism was not as overt, there was still a separation of classes and cultures happening in New York City. A great deal with this. So this led to the buildings falling into disrepair, health problems, and of course a little bit of unrest. As I mentioned, there were so many people in Harlem of course, that causes some tension when there's so many people surrounding you. Now by the 60s, things had loosened up a little bit, and some of the middle class blacks were leaving Harlem for other communities in New York City, Brooklyn, Queens, so on and so forth. Not necessarily Staten Island or Long Island, but mostly Brooklyn and Queens. By 1956, or by 1960, excuse me, 51% of the buildings in Harlem were below acceptable safety standards. In 1968, the city of New York was receiving 500 calls per day about crumbling plaster, the walls falling apart, rats, a lack of heat, or unsanitary plumbing. You know, when you flush, it's supposed to go down, and it wasn't always going down. Some other things about the situation in New York, education-wise. 75% of school children in Harlem tested below grade level for reading and 80% below grade level in math. 3 out of 4, 8 out of 10 were not getting enough education, could not pass grade level material. These aren't standardized tests, just grade level material. Uh, Infant mortality. There were 37 deaths per 1,000 live births in Harlem compared to 23 for the rest of New York City. 14 per 1,000. That doesn't seem a lot, but when you're talking about babies being born, every one death more is a great deal. Drug addiction rates were 10 times higher than the rest of New York City. So many people living together, poor conditions, not achieving or being able to get a good paying job led to these kinds of things. And of course, crime. The murder rate was 6 times higher in Harlem, and the crime rate was 50% higher than the rest of New York City. So not exactly a happy place to be living. It became easier for an uneducated black to get a low-paying job than it was for an educated black in his field in Harlem. We're going to see something that deals with this in the story relating to the main character, Alfred, and a cousin of his who does not live in Harlem, actually. So you'll get a taste of that and how it really played out in Harlem and in the black community of New York City. Religion is also an important thing of the 60s and in the story. Uh, there are at this time in Harlem, there are still more than 400 churches in Harlem. Many of them are what we call empty storefronts or apartment churches. They are not the large stone and massive and creative and expensive buildings that you know of. They are just and depanneur, left, somebody fills it in. A florist closes shop, a church moves in. In the United States, it's much easier to become a church or to start your own church than it is here. There are many, many churches there. And some of these congregations, or many of these congregations, only have 15 to 20 people that go to them. This has a lot to do with the lack of father figures in the communities. These places become places of information and support for the families. We're going to see this in the story as well. Alfred does not live with his family, his mom and his dad. He actually lives with his aunt, and his aunt is alone raising her two children as well as Alfred. And so she uses her church, a storefront church, uh, minister as a source of a father figure and a place for advice and guidance for Alfred. We also see reference to the Nation of Islam that started to grow in New York City at this time. Malcolm X was a member of the Nation of Islam and separated from the church in, I think, 1964, just before he was killed in 1965. His mosque is still there, as well as a strong presence for the Nation of Islam in New York City. We'll talk a little bit more about exactly what the Nation of Islam is, but it's not necessarily important to the story and for uh, your beginning reading of the story. Again, like last time, I'd like you to prepare some things for next class. I'd like you to compare and contrast what surrounds you and will either help you or hurt you for future success. What do you think about the education that you're receiving, the crime rate, the drug addictions, or the access to drugs, the housing conditions that you are living in right now? To help you a little bit with this one, I would suggest you go to Statistics Canada, that has a place for resources for students to help you. Here is the web address, as you can see, or you can go there and on the left-hand side, you will see uh, some 2 clicks and you will be at this place. Again, you're going to have to be prepared to talk about what differences and similarities you see. Certain groups of 3 to 4 students will be asked to speak in front of me and will be evaluated for their speaking during these discussions. So that ends part 2 of our preparation for the contender.